Let's hope we're on the air, and let's hope we're both in the picture, Gordy.
Are you ready to go?
We're ready to go.
It is January 2002, and it is time to recapitulate. And as soon as we check the meaning of that word...
As long as we don't regurgitate.
Well, let's call it a review. Calvin and I have been doing this show since 1997. What month?
Well, we started, I would assume it was early July, the Clinton County Fair, mid-July. The first program went on the air in the northern tier, Labor Day weekend, and I think shortly thereafter in the Plattsburgh system. So we've been on there every week since Labor Day of 1997. We did a few shows ahead before we started running them, and
so we're shooting for 5 years then in July.
Yes, yes. Come Labor Day, we'll have been on the air for 5 years, and the time has flown, hasn't it?
Sometimes those little experiments turn out to be a lifetime project. But I promise you it's been a great deal of fun. And the reason for Calvin and I sitting in his studios here at Hometown Cable on the Ridge Road in Champlain is to go back and see what just looking at those titles will do for us in terms of our memory banks. We're
going to play a little word association. I called Gordy up and said, how'd you like to take a psychiatric test here? We're going to do a little word association game. I've got a random list. It's a random order of the first 2 years of shows that we did. And if we run out of those in the first hour and a half that we're going to be taping this, we'll go on to further shows. But I think the first 2 years we'll probably fill up that tape, if not more.
It would be impossible to show pieces of all of the shows that we've done. Some were tremendous, some were not quite so tremendous, but they were all great and a lot of fun. And I have to say that for me, the last several years has been a great learning experience. And as I was driving up here in the middle of January on a winter day after snow squalls blew through and I had to turn around on the way from Chateauguay the night before, I was thinking what shows impressed me the most, and a lot of them have to do with history and with senior citizens, people in their 80s and 90s who have lived such a jam-packed life of experiences that it makes your life and mine pale by comparison.
There's I think it's CBS that has a show where the guy throws a dart on the map and goes in the phone book and points, randomly finds a person, and he says everybody's got a story. And I think every week we try to prove that right here in our own hometown.
Over and over and over again. So what's the first one that comes to mind?
Well, I thought, Gordy, because every once in a while people ask, how did this all begin? I'd just very briefly tell people how local cable television started,
Absolutely.
if you don't mind.
Good.
In 82, which is 20 years ago as we're taping this.
Wow.
But summer of 82, I was reading the newspapers very religiously, because I am a Yankee fan, New York Yankee fan, and I wanted to know when we'd get cable so we could watch the Yankees on cable TV. And in reading the write-ups, I noticed that it mentioned an access channel, and I'd never heard of an access channel before. So I read more about it, then I did some investigating, and I found out that this channel was available to the public to put the programming on. So I immediately set about with a plan to do that. And I ran into a few roadblocks, but those roadblocks were hurdled, and on June 11th, 1983, we heard the golden tones of Gordy Little saying, welcome North Country to our hour. And the first program in local area was on the air June 11th, 1983. And if I think of it right now, for the next 15 seconds, we're going to play just a brief segment of that. So we're going to pause for 15 seconds. So if I find the tape, it'll be on right now. If I don't, you'll be looking at us for 15 seconds.
Hello, North Country. This is Gordy Little, welcoming you to Our Hour, a weekly presentation produced and coordinated by your neighbor, brought to you in the interest of highlighting and promoting.
15 seconds is a long time when you're just sitting here doing nothing, eh, Gordy?
It's hard for me to believe that was 1983.
Yes, June 11th it went on. What I did was, the program was underwritten by the Woodmen of the World Lodge 462, and as a public service thing, it was a weekly show. And Gordy, being a Woodman member, I went to him and asked if he'd do the introduction, and he said certainly, and he added a little music to it, and that's how the program began. And we did a few summer ball games, and It's been 19 years as we're taping this since all that happened. And so we fiddled along. Back when I was first envisioned this local channel, I envisioned sports, which has become a big part of what Hometown Cable does, but I also envisioned a show like we are doing with our little corner, and like I did with Bob Venn with What's Going On Here. Right from the very beginning, if you check the old newspaper headlines, I mentioned doing local tours and talking to business people and so on. And it's always been what I thought would be an important part of what local television should offer. So I had this concept for this type of a show, but you need somebody to run the camera and you need somebody to at ease in front of the microphone. So my friend Bob Venn, who helped me in many ways with Hometown Cable, he retired. I think he was only 60 years old when he retired, and he stayed on as a consultant with Transborder, so he was tied up once a week. But I kept kind of bugging him to get involved with this. And it was tough to bug him because there was not going to be any money involved. It was going to be a freebie.
Yeah, I know how that goes.
But you can impose on your good friends for those type of things.
Yeah.
So finally, in '89, we did our first show. In fall of '88, the farm next door, the Ridgeview Farm, burnt to the ground. And they were rebuilding it in the spring of '89. So Bob came over and we did our first show. And that following fall, we did a couple more. And then in 1990, in April of 1990, we started doing a weekly show called What's Going On Here. But for years, the most talked about shows we did, we ended up doing a follow-up at Ridgeview, were the two shows we'd done at Ridgeview. So I told Bob, I said, it was all downhill. After we did our first show, we've gone downhill. Until 1995, when we ran into a gentleman named Jimmy Misek. And this man has become a legend, and deservedly so, in the area. He's just a fantastic person.
Almost everywhere I go, almost every week, somebody mentions that show, because we do stick it on every now and again.
It's my Thanksgiving staple. Every Thanksgiving, for as long as I'm around, that show's going to be on.
It was just absolutely wonderful. Sometimes you get lucky, but most of the time we've been lucky. And I have to tell you, to interrupt you just for a moment, that I had the same feeling about hometown shows way back before you and I ever met, when the Federal Communications Commission decided to allocate some local channels for low-power television. It was a dream that I had to do this kind of thing, never connecting it with Calvin Castine. It didn't work on my end because I had a boss at the time that didn't think it was worth the money, the investment. In retrospect, of course, it would have been, yes, based on what we know about cable systems and so on. But isn't it interesting that we should get together after all those years and cement a relationship which has been not only satisfying for us, but hopefully for those people who keep coming back and saying, you know, we really like that Misek show.
Yeah, and outside of the flood of '96, which was and turned out to be a 4-hour program that Bob and I did, and I pieced together dozens and dozens of video footage that people had done. The Misek show was definitely the most popular thing that Bob and I ever did. And with the flood show, we got a bronze statuette for a Telly Award, a national award. And that timing on that couldn't have been much better, because I ended up presenting Bob with that Telly Award, I'd say less than 2 weeks before he died. And if it had been a week or two later, he never would have known that he'd won that. And in '97, I hooked up with Gordy, and the sequence of events was Bob Venn and Teresa were the Northern Tier Chamber of Commerce King and Queen at the Winter Carnival. They had a very nice dinner in their honor. Bob ended up winning that Telly Award the Monday before he died. Bob died on a Wednesday. He and I went to Saint-Jean-sur-l'Richelieu in Quebec as part of this Triangle of Excellence stuff, and we did a program on their Saint Jean Baptiste parade. And he met Claude Bruchot and some other, not Claude Bruchot, what's his name?
You're not asking me. Forget it.
The man from up the writing up there.
Anyway.
Yeah, we've talked to several times, and I apologize if he ever sees this. But we met him and several other people, and on the way home, Bob said, "Boy, it's been quite a year." He says, "You know, I got to tell you more. I got King and Queen. I got to meet these people up there." The next day, Tuesday, we did 2 shows, which was unusual that we do 2 or 3 in a week like that, because it was a weekly show. We'd been wanting to do a story with a blacksmith, and we finally found one. We did a nice, interesting story with George Whitell from Moore's area. And in the afternoon, every year, we would do a show with Bill LePage promoting the upcoming Clinton County Fair. And we finished that show, and I looked at the time on the machine after, and looked at Bob, who looked like a picture of health. And 24 hours after we'd done that show, Bob had died of a heart attack. So he enjoyed himself right up to the end. Now, in the meantime, going on in Plattsburgh, Gordy Little had decided to leave radio, and they were having a big day in his honor. And that Saturday was Gordy Little Day, and I had intended to go down there and videotape the entire day. Instead, I was at Bob Venn's funeral. So it just ironic the way things turned out. Now, then when I brought the tape of the county fair preview to Bill LePage, about 10 days before the fair, he was asking me what I was going to do, and of course I had no contingent plan, because I had figured Bob was going to be active for another 5-10 years, and I wouldn't have to worry about such a thing. So I said, I don't know. I said, I've been thinking of talking to Gordy Little and seeing if he'd be interested in that type of a program and expanding it, making it more regional and at least in the Tri-County area. And I said, any idea where he lives? He says, yep, I know where he lives. So he told me where he lived, and I stopped in that afternoon and saw you, and you said, yep, that sounds like a great idea. Little did you know.
Little did I know, but you know, that's the way I do everything. Somebody will make a proposal, I say, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. You know the old phrase, it sounded like a good idea at the time? Well, it was. I hadn't, you know, I guess I did have a preconceived notion as to what was going to happen. But life has a way of playing itself out, and sometimes a little different than you planned. And I'm not at all unhappy that you and I had that conversation. You and I have had many conversations through the years, but that one I think was an important one. As I said earlier, for both of us, but for the North Country, because Bob Venn, the legacy that he left, which is, if we had a separate cameraman to pan around this room, his legacy is everywhere in this room. Hundreds and hundreds of recordings.
Yep. And you know, I've got over 10,000 things in here, and probably 80 to 90% of it is sports, but it's, you know, it includes the 400 or 500 shows that Bob and I did on what's going on here, and the approaching 250 shows that Our Little Corner has put together. So that brings us up to the list.
The list.
And this is a random order, and what I'm going to try to do here is insert the pictures from the shows that we're talking about. So if you're looking at us at a given time,
no, you
I couldn't find the tape. So that would be a
It's not like they're all in alphabetical or even chronological order, right?
No, I use the sewer system.
Yeah, that works good. The Dewey sewer system.
I said, people asked, do I have files? I said, no, I have piles. You know, I have piles and piles of tapes.
Well, it rhymes anyway.
Yeah, and the first show we did is the first one on this list here, and again, just to kind of link the two, it's ironic that it turned out that way, but the first show that Gordy and I did was the Clinton County Fair with Bill LePage. And
it's funny because, of course, I hadn't been on camera very much at all for any reason except at news conferences, etc. And, you know, I really didn't have much experience behind the camera in terms of knowing that you have to have pictures to go. So we stood there with Bill LePage in front of the fairgrounds for like 42 minutes before we decided to move. And Calvin is making all these sounds and motions, and I thought he had a nervous tick. Well, we learned a little bit, but not too much, because many of our shows find me sitting and listening to somebody because I'm tuned to sound. But our viewers have become quite tolerant of the way we do things.
Yeah, every once in a while I'm back there trying to get Gordy's attention. But if you're talking to people, you're carrying on a conversation, and you should be involved with the other person. You're not always paying attention to the person behind the camera.
That's true. In my case, it's very true.
So the Clinton County Fair in 1997 was #1, and again, these are in random order. But the next one on this random order is the Lion Mountain Correctional Facility, a tour and history of the old school in Lion Mountain.
And always a pleasure to go to Lion Mountain. You've been there to do a number of shows over the years with baseball players and with miners. It's a community that's such a big part of the fabric, the historical fabric of the North Country. You couldn't stay away if you wanted to tell a story. And that story inside that prison, with our guide who showed us where the principal's office was, and he's a man in his 40s or maybe?
Yeah, he's got to be
at least in his
40s.
40s. Yeah. And when we walk by the principal's office, you know he walks a little wide and has that funny cringing. So we know he may have visited that. But to go in a school that's now a prison and talk to the people and look in the nooks and crannies, that was a great pleasure.
It was. You know, the superintendent then at that time was Earl Kuchar, and I saw him at a parade in Lion Mountain. They do the annual 4th of July parade there, and I asked Earl about it, and he said, "Great, yeah, come on down." So he was most generous to us, and I can't remember our tour guide's name, but he was a graduate of Lion Mountain High School, so that made it that much better than having some person who'd never been there. So he gave us, you know, the personal, heartfelt tour, and that was fantastic. And
we visited the beach, remember?
Yeah, on the way out of town, we went to the Dannemora beach there, the Shazy Lake beach, where they've done some work. The people there, the people there do a lot of work on throughout the community. But yeah, you're right about Lion Mountain being an important part. It's a little hard to get to. You got to go through a few hills and a few curves to get there, but it's worth the trip. And I try to get up there at least once a year for the 4th of July, if not other things. And now they've got that great historical group there that is doing a lot of things.
And in terms of sports, I mean, they've been involved in many sports activities down through the years. Baseball, you know, huge sport for so many generations.
Yeah, this summer they did their baseball retrospective, and they've done the mines, and they did the railroads, and they're going to have a nice little museum there when they get all done. So that's a good group that's working hard. Next on the list, this was a trip that you and I enjoyed the heck out of. It's actually a two-parter. Might as well cover them both at the same time here. The D&H Railroad book and the Rutland Railroad book with Jim Shaughnessy.
Well, that was a wonderful trip, not only for you and me, but for our wives. Because look where we went to do it.
The Von Trapp Family Lodge.
Oh, my.
In
Stowe, Vermont.
Yep.
The women were going to look at a shrine up back, and they brought us pictures back, and you and I sat there for how many hours?
Well, we got there early. I think we got to Stowe around 8 o'clock, because you know Jim has a week or two of timeshare that he has in a condo up there, and what a fantastic man, and what a fantastic story he has to tell. And I'm just so glad that we did both of those stories on two vital parts of the history of this area, the D&H and the Rutland Railroad. And then to tie it in with the Von Trapp family from The Sound of Music, it was a great experience.
It's always been a special place for me anyway. And that was one of those days where we felt badly when it ended, even though we'd been sitting in the same chair for 4 or 5 or 6 hours. And if people have not seen those books, and if they've ever, and who doesn't love railroads, one way or the other, people who haven't seen those books or these programs, I hope you get a chance to do both, because that was very special.
It certainly was. It was. Those books are worth being on everybody's library, if one or the other, because if you live in the Franklin County, then the Rutland Railroad came through your area. If you live in the Clinton or Essex County, then the D&H came up, and of course they met in Rouse's Point. But it's just a fantastic piece of history for the local area.
And when you stop to think about it, we've touched on railroads, railroading, and model railroad buffs, and many times in the course of the programs you and I have done over the last several years. So, yeah, like Lion Mountain, railroads are a big part of this North Country, right?
Yeah, we're going to be getting into another. No, maybe not. No, that was something I did with Bob. We did a history with Terry Gilroy on the history of the Dannemora Railroad that that Smith Weed put in there to get the ore out from Dannemora, then later on from Lion Mountain. So that's another chapter. Another one is again, it's multiple chapters. Every year since '98, we've gone to the Business Expo, the Chamber of Commerce Business Expo, which is held in the late spring, early summer. And every year they seem to outdo themselves, and you don't have trouble making a story there. It's just trying to decide what you're going to do in an hour and a half, and not cover the other stuff.
I'm sure everybody who watches this program knows what a gem Gary is. But every time we talk to him, isn't it amazing how the man gushes with enthusiasm for his job and for the business climate in the North Country? And he's been largely personally responsible for accomplishing so much since the day he walked into town.
When Gary Douglas took over, he took over for a very dynamic leader, Amy Whitehead.
Oh, yes.
And I said, gee, how are they ever going to replace Amy Whitehead? But Gary took off from that point, and it just soared. This chamber has grown by leaps and bounds. It is doing more things and is responsible for more things than you could possibly imagine 8-9 years ago when Gary first moved into the area. He's an amazing individual, and we're lucky to have him, I think, at the chamber.
And as part of Calvin's tenure with Hometown Cable, you recorded dozens and dozens of shows with Gary Douglas, which played on local TV systems on a regular basis.
Yes, we for 3 or 4 years there we had a regular show. It's in hiatus right now, but we're hoping to get that one back. And the Chambers of Commerce can have a tremendous influence. I look at up close here in the northern tier when the new bridge was coming in between Rouse's Point and Alberg. And for years we used to pay a toll to go across that old rickety bridge, the drawbridge. And the new bridge wasn't going to be a drawbridge. And at the time, Mark Berry was the head of the local Northern Tier Chamber of Commerce. And they were talking about a very high toll. And he got in there and fought and used his leadership with people that he knew in politics. And it ended up we went not from a high toll, we went to zero toll. So when the Chamber of Commerce speaks, it carries a lot of weight, even if it's a Northern Tier or the North Country Chamber.
Gary's he has the ability to convince people because he speaks in real sentences, and he knows how to quote facts and figures. And he's led some parades up into your neck of the woods to the border because he knows about the massive changes that have to occur. Because the man is, it's a pleasure to know him because he had vision. He has vision about what we need here to survive in the North Country. So his efforts at the border here are going to be classic in retrospect.
And Gary is, he knows all the places to go. He worked for many years before he came here for Congressman Solomon out of the Glens Falls area, who recently passed away. So he knew all the inroads and he knew how to go. So he had a wealth of experience that he brought to the area, and yeah, he's been tremendous. And the Business Expo, of course, keeps growing, and every year that gets bigger and better. Next on our list, the CVPH New Emergency Room.
We still call it the emergency room, even though the first day we went there they told us no, it was a more general facility and it was a complex and it was a big, and still, thanks to that very popular program on television called ER, I don't think we'll ever call it anything but the emergency room. And now they're talking about making more changes to it, and it's hard to believe that that's been, what, a couple years ago, huh?
I think it was 97 or 98 that we did the emergency room show. I'm not, if I would have had to guess, I would have said 97, but it might have been 98.
We've done many shows at CVPH Medical Center since then, not the least of which is one that we did only a few months ago in terms of when we're recording this in January of 2002, which was especially delicious, wasn't it?
Yes, you're talking about the tour.
Oh God!
Yeah, with Hal Miro taking us around, and just a tremendous show. But we've done, because last year, 2001 was the 75th Jubilee year. We did a lot of great shows, and we ended up doing a couple with Dr. Van Acker and Dr. de Grand Prix, and it just, I just enjoy we stumble across sometimes.
Well, we do, especially when it ties in with history. I mean, you're talking about trying to cover 75 years, and you're talking about Mr. and Mrs. Miner, who had such a tremendous influence on your area here, Chazy and down through Plattsburgh, and on the history of our nation when you stop to think about it. Yeah, we did get into some good stuff.
Oh, yeah, definitely, definitely. So that was a CVPH emergency room, emergency center, or whatever the facility
call it
is.
the ER.
Whatever. Next on our list is the Franklin County Fairs. We did 97, 98. I don't know if we've been back since then. I know we did 2 in a row. We met Howard Manili the first year, and he took out that great old poster that you were so happy with.
Oh, what a guy.
And the next year, we met a man who there's a road named after, Wallace Hill, who was the manager that year. So, but I remember that big poster that he pulled out. You were talking about some
Lucky Teeter.
Yeah, whoever it was.
Well, you know, it was a big thrill to go back there, first of all, because as I recall, I hadn't been back there for something like 42 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Since I was a senior in high school. And it was significant for me because we walked in the gate, and a gentleman walked up to me and said, "Hi, Gordy, how are you?" As if he and I had just said goodbye 5 minutes before, and we hadn't seen each other since we were 18 years old. And I said, I knew I was home then because we still call it the Malone Fair. And every year, Kay and I try to get down to the Malone Fair just for old time's sake for both of us. Real nostalgia. Huh?
Yes, yeah, it's a great fair site. I know Clinton County envies their fair site because it's right there on Route 11, and every day when you drive by, you see the fairgrounds. They got a big sign now that tells you what's coming up. So a year ahead of time, you know who's going to be there and when. So it's a real tradition in Franklin County, and it's going as strong as ever.
And it was so hot when Kay and I went there this past summer when we were sitting for the country show. Boy, you had lots of bottles of water that day. But it is a good site, and it is a lot of fun because, as many of our viewers might know, I spent almost 4 years of my high school in Moira, which is in a neighboring town. So the Malone Fair, as we called it in those days, was a real big deal, and still is.
Yes. All right, next on our list is the Village of Champlain 125th anniversary. We did maybe an hour and a half with the then mayor, Melissa McManus, and she gave us a lot of history of the Village of Champlain.
It's so great to get involved in these histories of all these small towns, because not only did we do Champlain, but we've traveled around. Anytime they have any historical event, we try to go there. And for those people who live here, it's great to see a part of their own history. For those people who live in Essex County or even in Morrisonville, where I live, who don't know about the history of Champlain, there's a history lesson. We should be giving out college credits for these things.
Well, I'd like to eventually document every little community in our Tri-County area. I think it's important, and every little community seems to have some little book written about its history, and it's just nice when they have these anniversaries, 100th or 125th or 200th or whatever, that we get there and try to cover them. We're around long enough, maybe we can do the 200th anniversary of the Village of Champlain.
It's great to meet the senior citizens who've been to more than one parade down through the years, and to see the people whose job it is to try to instill a love for history in us. And that was a particularly good day because we covered a lot of history.
Yeah, yes, we did. And next, we have another historic fair. I'm trying to remember if this one is even older than the Malone Fair. The Essex County Fair, where we ran into our old buddy Ernie Lapine down there. Who's now,
more than once.
Yeah, he's now retired from the fair. I think he's still active, but he's no longer the manager down there. But the Essex County Fair, and Gary Finney's even written a song about it. So it's got to be, a legend.
We saw Gary Finney every time we went down there. We interviewed kids who were basketball players. I remember we interviewed one of the gals.
Yeah, Erin Pratt.
It was easy to find her because she was a head taller than anybody else in the place.
Yeah.
But that was a wonderful time, and it's funny because at a dinner meeting about 1 week ago now, we're recording this in mid-January 2002, we were sitting around having a nice meal with friends, and we were talking about that fair and our experiences, yours and mine, and their experiences of going there to horse races in the old ancient buildings. I mean, it isn't the biggest fair in the world, but these little rural fairs are a treasure, aren't they?
They certainly are. And, you know, if you do nothing else in the summer, I think you ought to go to your own county fair. It's just, you know, just something that ought to be doing. And I think, unfortunately, it doesn't have the appeal to the kids growing up as it did when you and I were growing up, because now there's the Great Escape and there's all these super colossal places with rides and stuff. But, you know, it was a really unique experience and something that we look forward to the whole year. As soon as the fair was over, you couldn't wait till next year.
Oh, yeah, and start saving your money, too.
That's right, that's right. Just so those carny guys could take it.
You got it.
Yep. Next is sand sculptures at the city beach.
Oh, my. Helen Ionelli invited us down there for years. I acted as a judge for a long time before you and I ever put them on tape. I was putting them on the radio and talking about them. And the Press Republican always very much involved in going down there. And I have to tell you, in the introduction to our show, there's a picture of a very pretty girl in a bikini that Calvin somehow was attracted to, or the camera itself just focused there automatically. And every time that comes on, I hear my wife in the background saying, sure, never mind the sand sculptures. We have had a lot of fun there, and that's, you know, it's great to see our Canadian visitors on the beach. You and I could reminisce for hours about what life used to be in the 60s and 70s down there. But on a good year, it's great to see our Canadian visitors and the local people taking advantage of the sun and sound. You talk about the floods of 1996. We had a few years when there wasn't much sand. Nowadays, as we tape this retrospect, if you will, of our little corner and the other shows that Calvin has done, we won't have to worry about that. Our lake levels are so low because of recent droughts that there'll be a lot of beach. And that beach along Lake Champlain is the longest, I don't know if I can get this right, is it the longest freshwater beach in the world or in the United States? It has a,
I don't know.
It has a mark because it's such a wonderful long beach and has been such a great tradition around here for so many years. And I have to say that a lot of the pleasurable moments of my life have been spent in and around that beach area along Lake Champlain. We have a treasure, and I insist on calling it a Great Lake.
Okay. Now, that young lady you're talking about is an old friend from her days at Chazy Central, and I believe she's now a teacher in Beekmantown area. So
okay, I hope she's watching this, because I love to embarrass people if I can.
Well, she's one of these kids. You know, I meet a lot of kids over the course of the years, and some are real friendly when they're in high school. Then they get out of high school and they don't know who you are anymore. But she's always gone out of her way to say howdy, and so I wanted to make her a part of their introduction.
I think you covered that rather well.
Thank you very much. And getting back to the beach, we're going to go off subject a little bit here. That low tide that we've had a couple times over the last couple of years ended up finding some bateaus that we otherwise wouldn't have known we were there. And I can remember after the ice storm, after the summer of '98, Frank Papps worrying about the lake being too high, and because the stuff was jamming up on its egress going up into Canada. So it kind of runs its highs and lows, and at this present time as we're taping this, it's very low.
And we don't have too much control over that, but it does affect a lot of things.
I think we have no control over it.
I think you're right.
If you want to get down to it. All right, next up is the Alice Hyde Hospital, Part 1 in Malone.
I still think you and your good friend down there should have a little game of horse on camera.
John Johnson, yes. John is
what a guy.
Is the manager down there, and his daughter and my daughter played AAU basketball for a couple of years, and his claim to fame is he beat me in a game of horse. But you know, that we'll let him retain the title for now.
Interesting to watch these facilities grow. That one, the Adirondack Medical Center up in Saranac Lake, and other small facilities grow. And CVPH, you know, you talk about growth. Look at how it's become such a regional medical center. So this happens because there is such a need. And as we're taping this program, there is a critical need for nurses. still. And all these hospitals, I should say some of these hospitals, are not able to open beds to patients because they can't get the staff. And so that's what's happening right now. As we tape this, we don't know who the new president, CEO is going to be at CVPH Medical Center, but he'll be named he or she will be named very shortly. I expect it within a day or so. Maybe by the time this tape gets on, our audience will know who it is. But we did have a great day down there at Alice Hyde Hospital in Malone. You know what? It was history again.
Oh,
we learned so much about the old part of the building, the expanded portions of it, the new campus, looked around the neighborhood. That was a really special time.
And that show, like you and I feel so many of our shows are important not only now, but 50 years from now, and you can look back and see what it was like then. It's all state of the art now. I think CVPH is the regional hospital in this side of the lake, but these other hospitals, as you mentioned, and like Alice Hyde, they're coming along so quickly too. They're doing things that they probably couldn't have imagined doing 5 years ago. And John said, part of their vision is to keep up with this stuff, try to keep up and look ahead and know what they've got to be doing 2, 4, 5 years down the road. That's a tough part.
Yeah, that was a good day, a lot of fun.
Yeah. Next is involved a very good friend of yours. It was a tour of a city hall, the new city hall in Plattsburgh.
We have become such good friends with Keith Herkelo, you and I. Keith and Joy and their children are very, very close personal friends of Kay's and mine. And we've watched Keith grow as a person. Hopefully he's watched me grow as a person, as we can see on camera here with this great belly of mine. But Keith has become a respected historian in the area, something I never would have guessed when I first met the guy. He was giving us a historical tour of City Hall, showing us, who designed the place and how, and we've learned a lot about that. And we also have watched very carefully his project of restoring the third floor auditorium of City Hall to its original grandeur in the second decade of the 20th century. And every time I go to a new function there, I look around and I think in my head, and publicly if I have a microphone in front of me, I'll thank Keith Herkelo for his volunteer efforts in that respect. But yeah, that was one of our fairly early programs, and we talked to Keith, and we've done several programs with him since. And he is a very interesting guy, and Plattsburgh City Hall is a really truly interesting place, and of course right across the street, the famous McDonough Monument.
Yep, and as we learned that Plattsburgh and the whole area has a lot to offer for history buffs, and
oh my! And
it's an evolving story, and every year we learn more and more about our past. Next on the list is something that is truly going to be historic, because it ain't going to happen, and that's Montreal Expos, Jim Beattie, and the new stadium. The new stadium for the Montreal Expos.
Now, see, Calvin's been there many times. Calvin, as you know, is a tremendous sports fan, and he's covered so many sporting events for, 20 years now?
Well, close to it, yeah.
And so he's been to Montreal many times. I had never been to that stadium before. And so it was a real thrill for me to be there, to be down on the field that day, to look around, and to hear this big pitch. We got the pitch that day.
We got the pitch, yeah.
And now, look,
As we're taping this, and this show will be shown in future years too, but as we're taping this in early 2002, there's still a strong possibility that there will be no Expos in 2002. The stronger possibility, I feel, at this point is that there will be a lame duck season in Montreal, and that they would. I'm going to bet that they're not going to be contracted, eliminated. That they will probably end up in the Washington D.C. area. Is what I anticipate happening to them at this point.
That seems to be going in that direction.
Yeah, but the vision of a new downtown ballpark is long gone. When the new owner came in, Jeff Loria, he alienated everybody he possibly could, whether deliberately or otherwise, and it's unfortunate, but as we're taping this, it looks like the Montreal Expos will soon be part of the archives. There'll be no more new new games there.
And we wonder about their ball club in Vermont.
Yeah, well, according to the Vermont Expos owner, Ray Pecor, they can survive. But if the team contracts, then he's got a problem. But if it moves to Washington, it's possible. But that franchise in Vermont started out, I believe, as the Mariners, then it was the Reds, or vice versa, and now it's the Expos. So it could be there, whether it's the Expos, Reds, Mariners, or some other group. I think Vermont baseball is going to be around for a while.
Yeah, but in any case, that was a great trip we had that day. You've done it many times. That was one of the highlights of our little corner for me.
Yep, and the nice part of it was we reintroduced Jim Beattie to his old catcher. Jim Beattie wasn't
that great?
A star pitcher briefly in the major leagues, but he starred at Dartmouth, and Tim McDonough from Rouse's Point was his catcher at Dartmouth. And we brought Tim McDonough along with us, and it was great to them to sit around and swap war stories.
Did you feel like Oprah that day? That's a lot of fun.
This is your life. I felt like Ralph Edwards.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, next is we're back to Franklin County and Almanzo Wilder Farm in Burke, and there you ran into some old buddies of yours at the farm.
It's amazing how that works. Because sometimes the more things change, the more they stay the same. When I first visited that farm, it was all run down and nobody really cared. And thanks to Larry House and his wife and a few other local people in that area,
Bud Tattershaw is the guy who gave us the
Bud,
tour.
and we see him every year, this year included, when Kay and I went to the Franklin County Fair. There he was. Now, he doesn't even live around here anymore.
Huh.
But they brought him back to talk about that homestead. And boy, you talk about North Country history with Little House on the Prairie and all the books. Our visits there have been cherished. And that one tour we did was just great.
That's a place that's got to continue growing. Little House on the Prairie continues to be shown. And so I think that those books will continue to be a part of everybody's library, and I'm sure that the Almanzo Wilder Farm will be a tourist stop for many, many years to come.
Yeah, that's great.
Next was something that even little kids enjoyed watching, the Plattsburgh Quarries.
Well, I must be a little kid, because it was a big thrill to me. My constant fear throughout that entire tour was these microphones are never going to pick up my voice. Those pieces of equipment right next to us, the big stone crusher. When we stood there, I didn't think we'd ever hear one word we said. Guess what we did? And what person of any age doesn't love to watch big equipment at work? And how many of our viewers have ever been inside that gate? Not very many.
That's right. Unless you're a contractor or a truck driver of some sort, you're not going to have any reason to go in there.
I was blown away by the size of the whole thing, by the equipment, by the asphalt plant. Wasn't that amazing to see those huge fires and to learn how they make the asphalt? Yep.
So that was a very interesting story. It was one of our shortest ones. It was maybe an hour, 7 minutes, or something like that. But it was nonstop. It was a lot of good pictures there, I thought, and a lot to be told. Next was another one I think is probably very close to your heart, the Plattsburgh Air Force Base history with Clyde Lewis and the old soldier Joe Bornstein.
Well, the fact is, as we're taping this program in 2002, the chances of ever getting those two guys together, even though they're both very much still with us, together to do that kind of a show is probably gone. And just being there was a tremendous, heartwarming experience for me, because I've been a part of what they've been a part of for such a long time. And when you think back into the early 1950s, and we also did a show at Champlain College, which many of our viewers may still not know existed on Plattsburgh Air Force Base, and was destined to be one of the largest segments of the state university at the time, until Clyde Lewis had a dream. The school closed, the Air Force Base was built. I got to work on it on construction. I got to be associated with it via the Plattsburgh Air Force Base Liaison Committee for years, and went to so many of those historic banquets, testimonial dinners, if you will, at the Officers Club. And, you know, all these things bring back memories. Now, every time you drive past that officers' club, you think about various people who recently have tried to open it as a restaurant. And we still don't know what the future of some of those buildings is going to be. But talk about Plattsburgh's history. The military history here goes back to the beginning of our country in the 1700s. Goes up through the 1900s with the First World War, the encampments here, the training, the Plattsburgh idea, the embryonic ROTC, which was formed here, yeah. And just to hear Clyde's personal history, right?
Yep.
His own personal history was tremendous. That was a great show.
And to have someone like Joe Bornstein,
The old soldier.
who is such a leader, who just kind of sits back and is willing to be in Clyde's shadow when he's around Clyde, because that's a respect he has. And Joe Bornstein's in nobody's shadow, but he does, when he's out of respect for Clyde, he sits there and is willing to say Clyde's the man. And you know, and Joe Bornstein is certainly one of the great legends of our area.
Well, he's been such a good friend. In later life, he got a job at Plattsburgh State, as touching the lives of so many young people trying to get jobs in college. He worked as a part-time salesman at the radio station where I worked for a long time. He was the #1 Irishman of the year.
First one.
The very first one, and has attended many of the ceremonies, has been the master of ceremonies and par excellence in that category for so many functions down through the years. And he's still got the best stories about Montreal and other things too. Joe Bornstein, a great friend.
And some of them are even true.
Yeah, some of them. like mine.
And next is PSTV, Plattsburgh State Television. That was an interesting little story.
Well, I got to tell you, I was working in the radio business when the college first decided to build a radio station. Many years ago, they thought it would be a nice thing to have one. And they were kind enough to ask for some of my help to go over there and help them organize in the beginning, which I did. And I always supported what they were doing. And then to get into the television aspect of it and see how it really works has been terrific. And I have to say that even before you and I started this little fiasco called Our Little Corner, I would occasionally go over and be interviewed by the students at Plattsburgh State, and it's a kick. And you know, people talk about the kids of today, but we watch these kids operate over there at Plattsburgh State, and I have great faith in the future, because I've met some people who've gone on to do very good things in radio and television after being there, and so I really appreciated that tour as well.
And you know, and they've. You know, their most illustrious alumni probably from PSTV is Don Fratangelo.
Well,
yeah.
Anybody who's ever heard her name knows, and you will see her and hear her all the time now on NBC.
Yeah, she's one of their ace reporters now. Gets the big stories and the magazine type stories, and you know, certainly a success story. But there's been a lot of others out of there too. So that was a great show, and I found it very interesting. Next is one of the business tours that we've done, and this is another local success story. And these are always fun to do when somebody has an idea and makes it work. And Don Koval and his wife had a successful tree farm up there, but he decided to get into the bottled water business, and Frosty Springs is still going strong.
You know, it's amazing. We have done a lot of those business stories, large ones and small ones, and we can forecast, if you will, on this program that we'll be doing a lot more of those in the future, because it's all part of who we are. But to go out in the country, see the tree farm, see the springs, and realize how Mother Nature put those springs on that property and how they capitalized on it and how they had their daughter make their logo, which is now almost world famous, that was a real kick. Because to be an entrepreneur on that scale takes a lot more work than you ever can imagine. And we got kind of the inside tour, didn't we, that day?
Yes, and it's fun. And again, it's equipment moving, and it's just interesting to watch that. So it's a nice story, and it's interesting to watch. I know because you're on the radio so long, you don't always as we mentioned earlier, always look for the pictures, but that's what my job is, to look for those pictures. And when it's stuff moving like the Plattsburgh quarries or this bottled water going through in a conveyor, and as Gordy alluded to we are going to be getting into some big stories here coming up very shortly. We can't get into it right now because it's still being ironed out, but we're going to have some nice tours coming up very, very shortly on Hometown Cable in our little corner. Parc Safari Africain is next.
Wasn't it great? And we got there at a perfect time, just after they had added a tremendous new addition, and we felt like we were walking into a community in Africa when we first went through the doors. But again, that's just a little tad north of the border, but how great that's been for people in this area. And we got to meet some young people who had been working there, a young guy who'd been started there as an employee.
Danny Kyle, he's the owner.
He came to own the joint.
Yep.
And we liked what they did up there. That was a lot of fun that day too.
Yeah, and even though it's on the other side of the border, it's only probably, if you were to walk across the border, and you shouldn't do that, but if you were to walk across the border in Perry's Mills, less than a mile from the border, you'd probably run into the edge of Parc Safari. So it's only a couple miles from Champlain.
Was it Parc Safari or Granby Zoo that had the creatures that got out?
Oh, that was Parc Safari. And they were all
they
over.
Orangutans or
macaques. They're macaques, and they were all over the place. I think
people's barns.
The Armstrong family, their farm was still going in Perry's Mills at the time. And I'll never find that tape in my pile here, but
oh boy,
I did go down there, and I got about 20 minutes of them roaming around Leonard and Pee Wee Armstrong's barns. It was very interesting. But yeah, I think only one or two. I think they lost one or two that got hit by cars or something like that. It's
amazing that they got that many back. I was on the radio in those years, and people were calling me up with play-by-play descriptions as they were going flashing by the house. Oh my!
Yeah, so that was that Parc Safari is just a great story, and it's so close that if you don't bring the kids up there, you ought to be ashamed of yourself, because for the Canadian exchange rate and everything. It's something that people would travel hundreds of miles to, and do travel hundreds of miles to go to, and it's right there in our backyard. And if you don't take advantage of it, it's right after you cross the border. You can cross either in Champlain or Moores, and it's right there. Next is another old friend of yours that we did a story with, the New York State Police in Raybrook.
It's so great to get a story from the inside out. Most people have an association with the New York State Police, which is not necessarily pleasant. When occasionally, as I do, your foot gets a little heavy and you stop and get a ticket, and that's your association with the New York State Police. Of course, I have had
and some people have had even worse experiences.
Yes. But my association with the New York State Police and other law enforcement agencies in this area has been a very good one for all those years. Now that I think back, it's going on 41 years since I started in the radio business here, and I've come to know these state troopers, males and females. I was there when I hired the first female in the area, and my association with them has been tremendous. Outstanding organization, and to go to the inside with our good friend Dick Garcia. We had met Dick at the Malone Fair. Or one of the fairs.
I think it was Clinton County Fair, but it might have been Malone.
Could
no,
be.
Probably, I can't remember, but one of the fairs. No, it was Essex County. It was
Essex County Fair. He was just standing there. Poor Richard. Poor Richard, how's that? Poor Richard had fallen off a ladder and broken his leg. And he was a hurting machine. When a big guy breaks a bone, it's tough recovering. And he was just recovering the day we went to Raybrook. Excuse me. But he hobbled through, took us on the Cook's tour of Troopy headquarters, and I have to, you don't mind if I digress a little bit, because...
How am I going to stop you?
Forget that. There is a column in the Press Republican done by Sue Botsford on a regular basis called Look Back.
Mm-hmm.
And we like to look back here. But Sue does it. She does a lot of research for that column. She goes 25, 50, 75, and 100 years ago. And I happened to notice one recently, as we're recording this in January 2002, which said, Troop B headquarters moves from Malone to Raybrook. And that was the beginning. And it ties, it's a part of my life, maybe a part of your life. But when I was a kid growing up in Moira, Troop B headquarters was there in Malone.
That big building
A
there.
big, austere, and imposing place. And when they call it State Police Barracks, they weren't kidding. Guys stayed in the barracks.
Oh, when you hear the history of the life that some of these guys led, you had to be married to the job. You would work round the clock.
They discouraged the troopers being married. And I resent, you and I do this all the time. We resent not being able to get to people before they die. People that we know have great stories.
They resent it too.
Yeah. But it's when they're in their 80s and 90s, we try to get them. Then we don't get them for one reason or another, and we see their obituary in the paper. We say, "Oh my goodness, Trooper Bill Bush is a very good friend of mine from Katyville. I still correspond with him via email. Been a trooper in this area for a long time, but his dad was a trooper, and his dad told stories about being on horseback in the New York State Police way back in the early days in the 20s, you checked in with your local post office once a week."
It was like the Royal Canadian Mounties with the old Sergeant Preston
They
shows.
told you where you had to go, and you got the addresses, and you went and answered all the complaints, and then he was a correction officer for many years, and I'm sure had stories to tell. That would have been a great TV show. But in any case, our thanks to Dick Garcia, who's been a good friend. I ran into him. Where did I see him? In Orlando, Florida one time.
Well, of course.
We're both rather large and imposing figures, so we both stood out in the crowd. And I tapped him on the shoulder, and he thought that was cool.
Just you and he and Goofy, right?
Yeah, that too.
Next up is Elizabethtown 200th anniversary. There we went. I went and did the parade, and you and I went down, and we met a young man named Reed Larson.
And we met him a couple of times. And Reed Larson, very interesting person, very articulate, with a lot of knowledge about that area that I wasn't aware of. I mean, I visited there, not probably as many times as you have, but I didn't have a clue as to their history until we went there that day. So every one of those is a great history lesson.
Yeah, we don't realize the history of each of these little communities, and if nothing else, if Hometown Cable can become an archive of all the little history in these little areas that we all know about but don't give a second thought to.
That building, the history of that building alone was tremendous. I loved it when I walked in.
The boys' entrance and the girls'
that's
entrance.
Yeah.
I think we went in the girls' entrance.
I think we did on purpose.
Yeah, I think they call it the Adirondack Museum, but I know that I'm not quite sure. I know it's worded differently than the Adirondack Museum in Blue Mountain Lake, but it's an old school, and the old school, you had a boys' entrance and you had a girls' entrance, and we went in the girls' entrance, which is a side entrance. But yeah, Reed Larson has a wealth of information, and we did impose on him, and I'm not sure if part 2 of Reed Larson is on our list here, but we learned a lot about the history of Elizabethtown, and there's a community that's 200 years old, and you wouldn't think this nation isn't that old to have so many of our villages and towns that are over 200 years old.
He told us great stories about newspaper articles and murders from the past and a lot of neat stuff.
Yep, and right on the heels of that, in my random list here, is the Adirondack Museum at Blue Mountain Lake.
Well, I have to say that anybody who knows me and my family knows that this is a real treasure for me. But I think I'm not in the minority, because this is the most unique museum of its kind in the world. First of all, the Adirondack region has a charm for those who live here and those who wish they could come to visit here. And if they haven't visited that museum, they have missed out on a day of wonderful activity and wonderful learning. It takes you a while to get there.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's in Blue Mountain Lake.
It took us longer to get there because we ended up following the Route 3 or not, whatever we were supposed to do, we didn't do.
But anyway,
when we got to Tupper Lake, we took a wrong turn and we retracked. But what an experience when you do go there. And it's not one building by any means.
No, it tries to replay a lot of the history of the Adirondack by showing you things as they actually were. I mean, there is a train there. There is a stagecoach there. There are that wonderful building of Adirondack craft boats. And wasn't that woman charming who talked to us that day? A brilliant person, not even from this area, who learned her lessons very well and gave us a tour through that part of that facility. I've always enjoyed it. One time when Kay and I were there, they had just brought in a log cabin right out of the woods from somewhere. And they set it down there, and now I'm sure that's a fixture of it. You have to go back every year because they changed things. They had this beautiful sailboat in a plastic dome there at one time. I don't think it was there when you and I did our story,
no.
But they were going to restore it and bring it back because they realized that wasn't exactly the right facility for it. The history of logging.
And that's
Are
important.
you kidding? Wow.
Kay's father was a logger,
He
you
was
said,
in
right?
the woods, Alfred Vaughn. We took him and his wife up there one time in their senior years, and he went crazy. We didn't need a guide. He told us everything and what it was used for. He recognized people in the pictures.
You know, we can't go back and do what's gone. But wouldn't it have been great to have a video camera there when you were there?
That day. It was just an amazing experience because he was such a delightful person. Kay and I talk about it all the time. When he was a young boy, he went deer hunting right there across the road from where that museum was. So wasn't it significant to get Alfred and Leona in a motorhome and take them up there and spend a day with them and just listen to him comment on that? That was worth the whole thing to me. And Kay and I have been there and listened to many tremendous lectures. You and I went through that beautiful Pullman car, and all the exhibits there are just special. And they have rotating exhibits of paintings and various works of art connected with the Adirondack region. I mean, a region that is so, talk about rich in history. You know, that ties in almost everything we've said, from the railroads to the churches to the small communities, and you will never find another museum quite like that anywhere. I think you'll agree. Definitely.
It's called the Smithsonian of the Adirondacks, and it certainly is. It's a great treasure. The history of the common people, and of course the Adirondacks for so many years was the playground of the rich and famous, and but this is a history of the common people and what they did. The people who carved out the Adirondacks.
Not to mention Noah John Rondo and his actual hut there, and his actual voice, and a beautiful wooden hand-carved sculpture of the man.
Yeah, there's just so many stories. You can't get there late and expect to.
Oh no, spend the day.
Yeah, you got to get there early and maybe spend a couple of days. Next is a show. I thought that. It's hard to move you, Gordy, sometimes, but I thought you were moved when we went there to St. Anne's Shrine in Isle of Mont.
I always have been. I've been there a couple of times since, and I want to go back with my wife. It's something that she and I have not done together. I love to experience things with Kay together, because I went back and told her about it, and she nodded and understood. It is a moving place. No matter what your religious persuasion might be, you walk on those grounds and they say that those are hallowed grounds, you will find out what the definition of that term is. Very special place. And a pretty special person to show us around.
Yeah, Father Boucher is just a treasure. I saw him recently, maybe a couple months ago. He looks like he's doing well. He had a stroke maybe 2 years ago, and he's been walking with a cane, but he's still getting along very well, and he's another one of these treasures that are going to be irreplaceable. But the shrine itself is such a place. You have to really be, I think, an atheist. It doesn't matter what you believe in. If you have any belief in the hereafter, you get moved when you go there. It's just a very holy place.
It's a nice place to go to the outdoor mass there in the summertime. That's pretty neat. To camp there, talk about the history of Lake Champlain region. Boy, they got it right there in that spot, don't they?
Oh yeah, definitely. Oh yeah, definitely. The Isle of Mont is a very historic spot, and it just to go there for the history is nice. But for a nice, calming experience, to me, you can't beat St. Anne's Shrine in Isle of Mont.
I enjoyed that whole day with you, and to learn about how Teddy Roosevelt was over there. And we started out before we got there. Actually, we started out at the local town hall, didn't we?
Yeah, we took a brief shot there at the local town hall, and it's ironic on my sheet here that I look at it now that St. Anne's Shrine is right next to the Adirondack Museum, because when Teddy Roosevelt heard that the president, was it McKinley, I believe, that he replaced, was shot, he was at a dinner on Isle of Mont. And then when he heard about the death of McKinley, he was up in the Adirondacks, and they've got the story there at the Adirondack Museum telling about his trip down to the...
Isn't that...
Yeah, so he went from Isle of Mont up to the Adirondacks, and, and both of those places are noted.
As we're talking here, I hope we have inspired some of our families to plan their vacations around some of these places we're visiting, because I dare say that we get so caught up in our own personal lives that we forget that we have so many delicious places here within 100 miles, 150 miles of where we're sitting right now.
Well, when people come up to visit and people say, gee, where do you take them? If you just look around, there's dozens and dozens of places. Yeah. When people say there's nothing to do in the small area like we are, small town USA, I'd say just follow me around for a month. I'll show you, during the summer, I can't keep up with all the activities we've got going on because there's always something going on, corresponding with something going on 50 miles away, 20 miles away, 10 miles away. You have to pick and choose what you're going to see. There's nothing to do. It's deciding what you're going to do out of the many things you can do.
Absolutely.
And one of those things you can do is go up in early July to the Tupper Lake Woodsman's Field Days.
What a day that was with my little grandson Tony, who's a few years older than that now, but I'll bet you he'll never forget those experiences. When we stood there during the parade, and we talk about equipment at the quarry, some of these trucks that came by, this kid's eyes were about 40 times larger than normal. And watched that parade, and then we went back to the Woodsman's events. And I'll never forget watching him as he was watching the axe throwers. What a day that was. Wasn't that great?
Yeah, I wish we could have stuck around and made a 2 days out of it, because that was really great, and it is up there every year. One of these days we have to get back up there. I don't know if your buddy Morrison, is it Frank Morrison? Morrison, I know it's Morrison, but I don't know if he's still the PA announcer there.
Well, I hear from him every now and again. They gave him up for dead years ago, and I keep getting cards from him. He and his wife, very deeply religious people. I first ran into him at Coles Creek, where, as you know, I love to camp. He came over and talked around our fire one night, and he and his wife make rosaries for people, and gave us a rosary, which we cherish. So, see, that's how our relationship began.
Yeah, and he's very active, I know, with the group out of CVPH, the Eat Dessert First group.
Cancer survivors, for sure.
Yeah. Next, we go to back to school, and we haven't heard from them in the last couple of years. I'm assuming that maybe they don't have it anymore, but I think we made a total of 3 trips there. The Northern Adirondack Elementary Career Days.
Oh, isn't it great? First of all, you know how much Calvin and I love kids. And we've just been charmed every time we've gone to that school. Number one, the school has great memories for me, having watched it over the years and known so many kids and teachers who worked at the school. They survived a fire and rebuilt that gym in a beautiful way, and that's the gym where we actually did our shows. I've been there for volleyball games and basketball games, and so it was tremendous memories, and we were treated very well there, and hopefully we exposed some of the wonderful things that happen in the North Country to our viewers through the eyes of the kids and all the presenters. It's great, from the postmistress in your local neighborhood to our friends who do the historic interpretive walks at Point of Rush, to the New York State Police, to the people from Channel 5, and to cooks from CV Tech, all the way around the room, to lots of other folks that have been friends of ours for years, to the kids from the Future Farmers FFA of America. Great experience.
Yeah, and of course, we always like to make sure we get some of the expressions of the kids, and I know one of the years we met one of the youngsters stands out in my mind. That's the little Watts girl who wanted to be a reporter someday. She She is carrying around a microphone or something in her hands, and I see her now because her mother, Sarah Watts, worked with my wife, Judy, at Sheridan, the Harris Corporation. And so I see her daughter once in a while, and she is a foot taller than she was when you and I saw her that first time back in '97.
And there was a nice moment there or two with Teresa Venn and her family.
Yeah, in '97 they invited Teresa and her family up, and they gave us each a little
That was nice.
in memory of Bob, each a little reminder, and it was very nice of them to do that. Next is the Plattsburgh State Sports Department. Certainly a very active entity and growing every year. The sports department gets larger and larger, but at the time, for a brief period, Larry Cowan was the athletic director, and he was our tour guide and gave us a great tour.
We had so much fun because Larry's been a good friend for a long, long time. We've watched his career, watched his family, and of course we've been fans of many things that happened on the Plattsburgh State campus. And since that tour, a lot of things have happened. As you know, they were, back in those days, I think they were just starting girls softball.
Yep. Women's softball.
Women's softball. I don't know if they had reinstated lacrosse.
Lacrosse is going. It started just about the same time as the women's softball, so I'm not sure. I think they were working on it when we talked to Larry, and of course now they're talking, I think, baseball, and so every year it seems like they get bigger and bigger and more diverse. And
women's hockey's doing very well
women's
right
hockey
now as we speak.
Yeah, and who would have thought 15 years ago that you'd see women's hockey as active as it is? But it's certainly a growing sport that. You have to admire those young athletes that get out there and want to do that, I guess.
Well, you know, Memorial Gym has so many memories for me, and we can't spend too long on each one of these, but, you know, Louis Armstrong did a wonderful concert there in 1964 when we got rained out at Airborne Park. Memorial Hall was where all the classic basketball teams of the 60s and 70s played. And then the FISU games at the field house. And, you know, talk about memories in our communities. Terrific.
Oh, definitely. And, they're constantly on the move there at Plattsburgh State, and the sports is a big part of that. And, of course, the hockey program has probably been the highlight of their sports department, winning the national championships and so on. So, yeah, it's an interesting little school. Next, we've already touched on, is the Plattsburgh North Country Chamber of Commerce. This program here was not the Business Expo, but an actual tour of the Chamber of Commerce offices, and I think this was, we did this back when they first opened up that new facility, that new building there out on Route 9.
It's terrific to meet the people who work there behind the scenes. Some of them are still there, some of them are not, but I followed many of those people because they are my friends. I also, in turn, am able to direct folks that I talk to down there who are interested, for example, in starting a small business. Where do we go? What do we do? They have a special room down there, remember, that we visited,
oh, yeah,
where people can go in and work on a computer and talk to experts and try to decide whether their business might be successful, and that ties in with other programs we've done at Plattsburgh State that try to help small businesses in this area.
Yeah, the North Country Chamber of Commerce is just such a diverse organization. They have so much to offer that I'm not here looking to be their recruiter by any means, but it behooves a business person to at least find out what the Chamber has to offer, because I think people would be amazed if they're not familiar with what this North Country Chamber of Commerce is. If they haven't checked it out, they certainly should, because it can help almost any business person, large or small.
Yeah.
Next is something that we've covered once in a while. I think they do this every year now, the Battle of Plattsburgh celebration.
Yeah, they do. And since September 11th, the whole concept will change. And we learned that for the fall of 2002, they will start their celebration earlier because of the events that happened on September 11th. We were working very hard, as were all these people in the various organizations and societies connected with preserving the memory of the Battle of Plattsburgh, or the Battle of Lake Champlain, if you will, and the War of 1812. worked with them down through the years, trying to look at the different venues and so on. But this year will be even a little bit better, bigger and better, we should say. This connects with Keith Herkelo, our good friend, who's been involved in these committees, raising money in various ways. We were there as we got rained on when the rooster was christened that day.
That's a separate show.
That's another show. But every year we go back, and every year it's a lot of fun, and I've had a lot of privilege of reading my ghost stories there for a few years, and just to be a part of it, and to walk around town and see people dressed up in period costumes. That's great, because it's something I dreamed, prayed, and wished for 40 years ago when I first came to town. I've said this before, and I don't mind saying it again. History is something you can hang your hat on. We've been to many areas. I was talking with somebody the other day about Salem, Massachusetts, Cape Cod, various other places that focus on history. Why Plattsburgh didn't do this in this kind of way long before is beyond me. There were Battle of Plattsburgh celebrations for its 100th anniversary, for example. But only recently have we really decided that we're going to focus on it year after year after year. And look how it's grown since the first one, Calvin.
And you can't really get into the Battle of Plattsburgh without bringing in the Battle of Valcour, which was an entirely different war. But the Battle of Valcour was the birth of the U.S. Navy, and that happened right here in our backyard. Those ships were built in Skeensboro, which is. But it's just the history of military goes all the way back to the beginning, right here.
And we've done a couple of shows on the history of the Battle of Valcour. First of all, they had a public occasion down there where they brought people in and had events at the wonderful boathouse, the Valcour Conference in the Educational Center.
Well, you're jumping the gun. We're going to stick to our script here.
Well, are you talking the one we did with Eddie Scullin up in the...
No, we're not going to talk about that.
Okay.
We're just looking at this here.
My mind wanders.
Yes, because... well, so many of these things tie into another.
Of course they
do. And of course, in the Battle of Plattsburgh, every year we did 2 shows in '97, and we've done at least one every year since then. So we've done '98, '99, 2000, 2001, and every year we try to make each show different from the other one. And so far we haven't had any trouble there, because there's such a diverse amount of events going on. It's very easy to do that. So it's another thing that people should mark on their calendar and make sure they get down there and take part in it. It will be starting, I don't have a 2002 calendar in front of me, but I think it's starting on a Wednesday. Whatever day September 11th is the day it's going to begin. And normally they've been having it a couple days before, because the 11th is not falling on the weekends. This time they're going to start it on the 11th and run it the following weekend. So because of 9/11 back, September 11th with the Twin Towers and all. Next on our random list here is Park Update 1998, and part of that was, I think, the last air show was there. I think you went, you got some footage, and Jack LeDuc gave us some footage of the air show.
Yep.
And then we went and did an actual park update to bring people up to date. And park is another evolving story.
Oh, it's all the time. As more and more of the property is turned over to the various municipalities, things have changed so dramatically since I first looked at that property. I never forget coming here in 1955 or whatever year it was, and looking at those big piles of sand and wondering how I was ever going to get my little 39 Ford Coupe out through those sand piles to work on building those runways and pouring slabs for the Officers Club and various other places, working on construction, following the whole thing through, going through the terrible depression of fighting to save the base and then losing it, and now the excitement of all these new businesses coming in. It's really interesting to watch, and there are businesses there that I don't even know the name of right now. It's just amazing how they've grown.
Yeah, you've got to have an updated program. They got to issue one every week, because it's just constantly new stuff coming in there. And I don't know if 50 years from now, when the historians start writing about what happened here, I know militarily closing Plattsburgh Air Force Base was the wrong move. But as far as our area, with these base closures that went on after that there, to have to go through that the wars you had to go through every 2, 3, 4 years, it was better to get it over with, done with, let's move on. And it's brought in some great jobs, some great opportunities. I think in the long run, as far as business in our area, we're better off without the air base. But I think militarily it was the wrong move.
Yeah, well, it depends on whose ox was being gored at the time. And in retrospect, as always, hindsight is always 20/20, as they say, for vision. And yeah, we're very pleased the way things are happening. Clinton Community College suddenly has a dorm, and with the prospect of having another dorm. There are so many things that are happening and happening right. And that's a tribute to the people who were doing it and to this area who had faith in this, because this area is not unique in that way, but it is unique in many others. And other areas where there were base closures that didn't do very well for a long, long time to come.
And still are overgrown with weeds.
Oh, my. And I don't mind telling you, it was still a big kick to watch them as I was driving by from a meeting on a beautiful bluff at Clinton Community College, coming back as they were hoisting the Santa Claus onto the onto the airplane at the base entrance this past year for Christmas of 2001. It did bring back a flood of memories. And we talked about Clyde Lewis, and there is a Clyde Lewis Park right there, which was dedicated, and that's a very meaningful thing for me too.
Yeah, like you, I was very upset when the air base is closed. But as you look at it with a cold eye, and you look at the business and how this sparked that business rebirth in the area.
Tremendous.
50 years from now, we might look back and say, as far as Clinton County goes, it was a good thing. Yeah. I think as the businesses keep evolving.
A few years from now, the airport may be out there.
Yes, and who knows what that might lead to. So, all this thing is sparked because it's like a forest fire, and that gives them the rebirth. I think that's what happened here. We had a forest fire, and now we're in the rebirth portion of it. Next is another show that you and I enjoyed. Actually, when you think about it, Gordon, there aren't too many that you and I don't enjoy doing.
I don't know if we're naive or what it is, but we do go into this like children, hoping to learn and not doing it mechanically, because every person is different, as we said earlier. Every story is different, and it's just, we love it.
And this guy is a very unique person, Sid Couchy, in his home in Essex, New York. What a great story that was. The Richie Rich cartoonist for so many years, and up until recently, he's still out drawing. I'm not sure how Sid's doing as we're taping this, but what a great person, and what an interesting story he had to offer.
Sports fans.
Oh, he was a big Cleveland Indians fan, and he had the pictures, and he was out at a ball game with the name was going to escape me, the creator of the Phantom Falk, I think his name was. They're at some cartoonist convention, and he said they had the same birthday, and all these cartoonists were singing happy birthday to him at a ball game, and he had so many great memories.
Charming personality, and we've told the story before, and I don't mind telling it again, that he met his wife at a place called Requa Lake, which was my uncle's lake down in Rockland County near New York City. And when I discovered that about the man, after we had just collaborated on helping Dr. Nancy Church with a marketing book at Plattsburgh State, we were blown away. He said, "You would never heard of the place where I met my wife." I said, "Try me." And he said, "Requa." And I convinced him that my middle name was Requa, and that was the beginning of a wonderful friendship. But what a super guy, very humble, who never made 1/1000th of the money he should have made for drawing Richie Rich, was barely ever collaborated with when they made the movie on Richie Rich, but he's still a superhuman being. Really great guy.
Yeah, a great guy, a great story, and certainly one of the classics.
Oh,
and, and right next to it on my random list here is a classic that just got even more precious because we just lost this guy within the last month of we're taping this, and that's John Bacon. And And the story we did was a real story of Saving Private Ryan. But what a fantastic person John Bacon was.
Well, you know, I talk to Marion quite often now, and she senses his spirit in the room. How could you help it? He was such a powerful human being, such an amazing patriot. We talk about patriotism. Here's a guy whose patriotism didn't ebb and flow. It was always there. He took every occasion to dress up in his uniform and to talk about his connection with the United States service and what the armed forces meant to him and what the Second World War experience was, and parachuting into some pretty hairy places. And some people looked at John Bacon and said, well, I don't know, is this man just a blowhard? Wow, guess what?
Right up to the very end, until cancer did him in, this was a powerful, imposing man.
Oh, my.
And to realize that the gumption these people had to paratroop behind enemy lines on the morning before D-Day, to get in there behind enemy lines to prepare for the invasion is just a tremendous, tremendous story. And it was really an honor to have John. I have him on tape on a World War II story that Bob Venn and I did. And then to have this recap here with the Saving Private Ryan story, it's priceless to have this man on tape. I just think that these are important stories.
These are, we talk about enriching our lives by meeting people. John Bacon is one of those people. To hear his life story, a young guy from Ogdensburg made this kind of a move into the armed services, came back and promoted what he did and promoted serving in the armed forces, and it helps people like you and me and Tom Brokaw and others to revive the memory of World War II and what sacrifices these men and women made. Huh?
That's right, and I've several times during the course of this I've wanted to say it, and I keep forgetting to do that, is that there's a lot of stories out there, and Gordy and I can't be aware of all of them, obviously.
We try.
We stumble on more than we more than we search out. We stumble on them more than anything else, and it's very sad when Gordy said, you know, reading the obituary, and sometimes you read an obituary of somebody you knew very well, and in that obituary you find out, wow, I never knew they did that. What a great story that would have been. And so we need input from the viewers out there. If they know somebody who has a story to tell, then we'd more than love to get out there and do it, because we feel very strongly. We don't make a lot of money out of this, as you can probably tell from my surroundings here. We don't make a lot of money out of this, but we feel what we're doing is very important in our little pond here, and our little corner, I should say.
Our little corner of the North Country.
Yeah, so if there's stories out there that should be told, we're more than happy to hear from people, so by all means let us know. Next is the WPTZ Channel 5 News Department. I think we did this in early 98 or 99, and that has changed so much.
Oh my
since
goodness.
the time that we've done it.
No, the people have changed. I think Andy Wormser was the news director at that time and still is. But other things have changed.
No, he was the assistant news director. It was Stuart Ledbetter was the news director at the time.
Ah.
And but Aaron Clark was the anchor. And now we have Stephanie Gorin back, and Smiling Tom was there, and Tom Hollick was there. I think Mark Sudall and Chris Kelly were there too, and we talked briefly to Chris Kelly. And but it's an interesting story, and to find out why they bring so much Vermont news. They're a regional station, and how they go about gathering it. It was a nice story.
Well, you and I are more familiar with the technical aspects of television and radio than the average bear. So doing a program like that, I'm sure, is an eye-opening experience for many of our viewers, because they have no clue what that blue screen is behind the weatherman. And the fact that there really isn't a map there. He has to look into a monitor on the side to see where he's pointing. There were a lot of things that were a lot of fun, and they were in the midst of building a new set at that time. I'm trying to recall. They built it a couple of times since then.
Yeah, they were building a set, and I think they've rebuilt it since then too. Yeah. Next on the list, we did a couple stories at two different venues. One was in Ellenburg, and one was in Champlain at the VFW. on the heroes of the ice storm of '98, of the firefighters and the EMTs and all those great people, that town employees and so on, that did so much.
You know, even speaking about it is almost redundant now, because we've spoken about it so often, we've talked about it with so many people, and hopefully 100% of our viewers to our little corner are very aware of it. And just us mentioning the ice storm of 1998 will evoke tremendous memories. Wow, you took footage that never got on television, didn't you?
I've got footage. I've got that's that top box here. That's all
Yes, I do.
That is full of tapes from people who provided me with tapes of their own ice storm footage. And one of these days, I'm going to piece it all together into 2.5-hour tape. I've got Lita Kelly's ice storm song. I've got the Connecticut peddler Stan Ransom's ice storm song. They've both given me permission to include those in that videotape. It's going to happen. It's just I just don't seem, well...
Never enough hours in the day, as you well know.
I need 3 or 4 consecutive days to sit down and do it, because the ice storm, when one person driving down a certain road with a thing and somebody else is driving down another road, they all look very much alike. So unless I'm sitting down and doing it in a sequence where I'm aware of what I just put on there, it's going to be very difficult to do it and do justice to it. So it's something that will be done. I've got one more tape that I've got to track down. I've gotten permission to use it, just got to track it down. And when I find that one there, then I can earnestly get into it. But the heroes is what our shows were about.
Our shows were about, and we did many of them. We went to many places and talked to many folks, and it's one of those cases that proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that small town USA is the best of all possible worlds, because everybody helped everybody in some way. It was amazing. Talk about stories that were untold. Of all the stories we told, you know, there were thousands that were untold. I wrote a column about my Jenny the generator and taking that little generator of mine around and helping our kids and others pump out their basements, of bringing that space heater of mine up to Peg Barkham, who was freezing to death in her trailer up here in Rouse's Point, and everybody helping, and these volunteer firemen. They were incredible. To leave their own homes.
They'd leave their families and go out and help. You know, I know from just my own experience that I couldn't always get away to go out and do the videotaping, because you needed to have things done at your own place. And to go there and spend round the clock working as volunteers, it's just amazing what these people do. And we just can't say enough about them. And of course, I think for a lot of us, the ice storm heroes were brought back to mind, getting back to September 11th, 2001, when all those firefighters and EMTs in the city were killed going there and helping out. I think it reinforces that these are the heroes. The baseball players, the football players, these aren't heroes. These are athletes that make a lot of money. These people that are doing this stuff day in, day out, these are the heroes.
And don't look for anything in return except knowing that they helped their fellow man. That's great.
All right, next is right in your backyard. In fact, I think we shot part of it right in front of your doorstep. The Schuyler Falls 150th anniversary.
Wasn't that fun? And the parade, we were set up right in front of the fire station.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
People came by and said, well, how come you didn't pan around and show a picture of my house? We did have so much fun. It's always fun when you're talking about your own hometown. And I've tried to learn so much about the history of Morrisonville. When you're a resident there, I think it behooves you to know something about the house you live in, the house next door, and the people down the block. And it's always great to see people who are interested in history. And that was, as usual, a great experience just to be involved with my friends and neighbors and to have you there to share it with me. That was great.
Yeah, again, it's another opportunity to learn the history of another small community in our area. We're surrounded by small communities, and we've each got our own unique story, and it's nice when we can chronicle those. And next on my list here, Gordy, is something that you and I look forward to every year, because there's 2 times a year that we're going to be well fed and this is one of them. Pioneer days,
Oh,
97
my,
and 98
my.
at Bordeaux Brothers.
Just thinking about the pancakes gets me all cranked up here. I'll salivate so much I'll be like Pavlov's dog. It's fun to meet the people, meet the farmers.
Well, I think the free meal is nice. It's nice for you and I to enjoy, and usually we can't finish it all because they heap it on so high there. But it's important. Agriculture was such a big part of the history of this whole area, and to meet the guys who are hanging on, who are the last survivors, so to speak, here, and how agriculture is changed so much over the years. Of course, you worked on a farm as a kid. I grew up on a farm right here where we're taping this is where I grew up, and it was a dairy farm for up until very recently. And farming has just played such an important part, and to see these people that still trying to etch out a living.
And kids who say they want to be farmers in the next generation, that blows me away, knowing how hard it is to survive.
And to be a farmer now, you've got to be such a businessman, such an intelligent person to run a farm now. It's incredible the things you have to do.
We've learned that on all these programs, and how the guy has to milk the cows and then go in and figure things out on his computer about how he's going to plant next spring. It's amazing.
And it's no easy answer. I mean, we talked to some of the suppliers at these shows that we do here, and we'll get into Dragoons at another time here, but we talked to the suppliers, and the movement they've made as far as seed, as far as fertilizer, as far as herbicides and so on, it's just amazing. And to constantly keep up to this and find out what's best for my farm and what's best to feed my cows, what mix is going to be the greatest and economical. You can't just pour money down the hole. You've got to make sure that it works. And so farmers are amazing individuals. And next on our list is another farm type of business that's been around a long time. And again, these are old friends of yours, Parker's Maple Syrup in West Shazy.
They're just such good friends, and we've been there, and we were there after the ice storm in '98. When the ice storm first occurred, and we've finished feeling sorry for ourselves because of our individual losses, then he looked at people like Earl and Pat Parker and their family, who've had a sugar house, as many of the other maple syrup producers have in the North Country for generations, 114 years or whatever for these people. And then to think that they lost it all in one fell swoop, wow.
Well, they're hanging on, but they're not,
we thought they lost it all, but they managed to come back. They rented other sugar bushes, and trees, Mother Nature came back, and they're still surviving, and these are still very good friends of ours. So we always enjoy our tour there. What person who has never been to the inside of a sugar house wouldn't love to? I mean, how many years can you remember going inside a sugar house? Were there sugar houses here on your farms when you were in Ulster?
No, we never had any sugar houses.
Well, there were always sugar houses around where I was, and I always worked in sugar bushes, because that was they had to hire a lot of neighborhood kids to bring it in, because there was a lot of handwork before the days of the lines that they had coming down. So, yeah, you can conjure up the memories of the wood smoke and so on. And every time I go up to Parker's, it's a kick, because they are delightful people, and to watch it happen and to know how interested they are in teaching young people about it. So they get involved in some pretty nice tours and some educational things too up there.
Yeah, and the Parkers are definitely one of the best known families in the area for maple syrup, and it's very devastating. Even we talked about, we went there after the ice storm, and everybody's yard changed after the ice storm, because those huge trees, if they weren't destroyed, they certainly changed in appearance. I've got 3 big poplars in my yard that one of the guys working on a snowplow, my brother Sam is the highway superintendent here in town, and he said the guy coming through with a snowplow said it looked like 3 big cactuses sitting out there because so many branches had fallen down. they've survived. They're still hanging on. I wasn't going to cut them down. Just I wanted to see what would happen with them. And the tree is trying to fight back. But I've got some maples, and we're talking about Parker's maple syrup here. I've got some maples along the road that I think suffered even more. It didn't look it, but the woodpeckers are in there eating away at these trees, and they've been there all my life and probably all my father's life. My father was raised in this house where I am here, and it's sad that generations of trees being there, they're not going to be there probably for the next generation to enjoy.
For sure.
Next is another one that you might have enjoyed a little bit. Old-time radio personalities Bird Berdan, Chet Bosworth, Art Pierce, and of course Gordy Little.
Wasn't that a day and a half? Couldn't we have done it again and again and again? I mean, so much of a part of who I am, and I have to say that people responded to that very well in the North Country, because who didn't grow up listening to the radio?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
And you combine the experience. I was the youngster. I was the youngster there besides you in that group. And once we started telling stories, it's a miracle we ever got to shut off the camera. That was great.
Yeah, who didn't grow up listening to radio? Of course, I feel very fortunate that I am the age that I am, because I'm just old enough to remember before television, and to sit there and listen to these radio shows, and then to see television where you would go to somebody's house because they had a television, and our Miss Brooks or boxing or wrestling or whatever was on, and you'd go on a given night to watch it at that person's house. And what an experience that was to have lived through that, And I'm sure you did the same thing. You went to somebody's house and saw that first television set. And so radio, to people my age and older, was so much more important even than it is now. I mean, radio is still part of people's lives. They've got all the stations punched in on their dials on the car and so on. But
it's a different experience now, you have to admit, and it's not sour grapes on my part, because I enjoyed all the 36 years I spent in the radio business. But it is different now. People do listen, even in small towns, listen to radio differently, and the small town radio stations do things differently than they did way back when. So it was a good time for you to grow up, and certainly a wonderful time for me to grow up, because radio, my goodness, during the Second World War, to listen to that old radio and to find out what was going on in Europe on the radio, I mean, that was amazing.
And you had to picture it. I mean, now when you have a war, CNN is there, NBC is there, Fox News is there, CBS, ABC, everybody is there, and you see it happening. But
wasn't that way back when, and I've interviewed many of the old-time reporters and listened to many of their interviews on public radio and on television describing what it was like to do those first live reports from Europe and try to get networks together and try to be on the scene. It was very difficult and very interesting, and you use that magic word imagination, because it's true. When you listen to radio, you have to use your imagination. And I don't have to use much imagination to conjure up good images of all those people who sat around that day and told the war stories.
Well, what a great gathering that was, with Bird Berdan, Chet Bosworth, and Art Pierce. Just the stories that they could tell, and the memories they had, and they certainly, as far as media in the area, it was a great gathering and a great history that I'm glad. My kids, my youngest one, probably will vaguely remember him, but to have Chet Bosworth, I'd make sure my kids heard him in the morning, because I grew up listening to Chet Bosworth on the radio, and I made sure my older kids listened to this so that he'd be part of their memories, because it was Miss Lonely Hearts, and that's just playing the saw.
It's charming.
And I didn't find out till we did the stories with him that when he used to have Miss Lonely Hearts playing the saw, and he was whistling.
Yeah. And
it's just an amazing.
I love it.
But for our little corner of the world, these people have a great part of the history of and our memories that we have. And I'm going to close it off here because we've gone well over an hour and a half, believe it or not. We're only less than half the way down this page of the first 2 years.
I knew we weren't going to be able to go much farther.
And this show is either going to be a one of a kind, which I'll never do again because I got to go now and dig out all these tapes and put on all these pictures. So I'm going to spend I don't know how many hours doing this, and I don't like to do that. I like to go out and shoot and get the show on the air. But we're going to end up with I didn't realize it was not part of the first story we did here, but Park 98 Air Show was a separate show, and I guess that was the last air show there. Mark Berry was still the park chairman at the time, and I think he had left at that time, but he had arranged for this air show, and getting the air show there was important because you want to get air people there if you want to sell a flight line.
Yeah, a man of great vision that we've interviewed and focused on many times over the years, and does deserve a good solid comment here today because Mark has been really good for this area. Not to mention that he's another one of those fine human beings, you know?
Yeah. So the air show was another one that we did. Actually, it was pieced together after, again with footage that Gordy had taken and with some stuff from Jack LeDuc, and we're about 40% through this page of the first 2 years, so we're gonna maybe do this again, depending on how much time I spend piecing all this together. But I hope this wasn't the most boring show that people ever watched.
I'm sure it wasn't, because everybody loves a little retrospect. Even on our favorite television shows, it's nice to go back, and it's nice to listen to some of the old-time radio shows which some stations still produce. It's great to hear, and it's great for you. You love to look at old movies, and you know, it's nice to go back. As I said before, you have to know where you've been to know where you are and where you're going. And I hope our little corner has proved that to you today. This has been a lot of fun, Calvin. Thank you very much for sitting with me. It's kind of a rare treat to have Calvin talking as much as I do on television.
Yeah, usually I'm behind the camera
giving me the
all kinds of signals.
Say, stop already. But anyway, we'll do it for a long time to come. We'd like to thank all of our viewers for supporting us in every way. What Calvin said before is true. It's important that you tell us what you'd like to see. If you have any idea of how we can underwrite some of these programs so that we can do it for a long time to come, we'd love to hear from you too. Thanks again.
And as you may be able to see in the monitor in the background, we've been running. It has been blocked out because we were showing all these other pictures here, but I was running the viewer patrons in the background. Hometown Cable survives because viewer patrons in the northern tier are supporting it, and I'm not getting any support at all out of the other areas. So Plattsburgh and Malone, if Hometown Cable is going to survive, I need viewer support. We don't get out there spend a week out there looking for pledge drives. We just put our underwriters on the screen. So if you'd like to see your name up there and like to see Hometown Cable continue, I urge you to become a viewer supporter. And if you have a business and would like to underwrite our little corner program, we'd be more than happy to hear from you.
Oh yes, we would love to hear from you today. We'll do a special program at your place. Thanks again, North Country, for supporting what we do. We love to do it, and we hope to do it for a long time into the future. And who knows?